The parking lot was full, and no one stopped. Walter Bennett, 67 years old, struggled to lift heavy boxes into the bed of his old pickup, his back giving out under the weight. Dozens of people walked past. Only Caleb Foster, a divorced man, in faded work clothes, set down his bag and quietly loaded every box for him. When it was done, Caleb refused the money and turned to leave. Then a beautiful young woman ran toward them, calling out, "Dad!" Walter smiled at Caleb. What would these two strangers become to each other? The lot outside the Fairmount Commons shopping complex held 400 spaces, and on a Saturday afternoon in late September, nearly every one of them was taken. Caleb Foster had spent 11 hours inside that building, replacing a compressor on the roof unit above the north wing, and his shoulders knew it. He was 38 broad through the back, and he wore the same faded gray work clothes he had worn for 6 years because they still did the job. His truck sat at the far end of the lot, in the row where the employees parked, because the closer spaces belonged to customers, and he had never once considered taking one. He had lived alone in a rented house in the suburbs south of Denver since the divorce. That had been years ago, and the details of it had stopped mattering to him in the way that a scar stops hurting and simply becomes part of the hand. What remained was a habit of keeping his life small and honest. He worked, he came home, he fixed what was broken. He did not date. When friends brought it up, he changed the subject so smoothly that most of them had stopped bringing it up at all. Caleb had one rule he had never articulated out loud, but had never broken either. He refused to measure a person by what they owned. He had watched too many men at the complex speak one way to the tenants who leased the corner suites and another way to the woman who cleaned the food court, and something in him went cold every time. Kindness, as far as he was concerned, only counted when the person doing it had nothing to gain. The moment you expected something back, it stopped being kindness and became a transaction. 60 yards away, an old man was losing a fight with a cardboard box. Walter Bennett looked like every retired contractor in Colorado. Worn jeans, a flannel shirt gone from washing boots that had been resold twice. His pickup was a 1998 model with a cracked taillight and 190,000 miles on the odometer, and he had turned down every offer to replace it. He had spent the morning buying fixtures and hardware for the cabin he kept 2 hours west, and he had loaded the first 4 boxes himself before his lower back locked up and reminded him of his age. What nobody in that parking lot knew, and what Walter took a quiet pleasure in nobody knowing, is that he had founded Bennett Industrial Group in a rented garage with 2 employees and a line of credit he could not afford. The company now manufactured heavy equipment on 3 continents and was valued in the billions. He had stepped down from operations 6 years ago and kept only the title of Chairman Emeritus, and he had gone out of his way deliberately and consistently to live like a man who had never made a dollar he did not sweat for. His daughter Clare had inherited the business mind he had spent his life building. She was 32 sharp in a way that made older executives sit up straighter, and she held the position of Vice President of Strategy. She was also, Walter knew, exhausted in a way she never admitted. Every man who had ever come toward her had come with the name Bennett already in his mouth. She had learned to wait for the moment their eyes changed, and she had gotten so good at spotting it that she had started seeing it whether it was there or not. Walter did both arms under the 5th box and lifted. The pain went through his spine like a wire pulled tight, and his knees folded. He caught himself on the tailgate, and the box tipped toward his chest. A woman in workout clothes glanced over from 2 cars down, then unlocked her sedan and got in. A man pushing a cart of groceries slowed, looked directly at Walter for perhaps 2 full seconds, and kept walking. A couple came past close enough that Walter could hear their conversation about dinner reservations. Nobody stopped. It was not cruelty. It was simply that everyone had somewhere to be, and an old man leaning on his truck was not an emergency. Caleb had crossed most of the lot toward the employee rows, with his keys already in his hand, when he saw it. He did not think about it. He set his bag on the asphalt and covered the last 40 feet at a run, and he got both hands on the box a half second before it came down on Walter's chest. He took the weight off, swung it up onto the tailgate, and turned to look at the old man. "You all right?" Caleb asked, keeping one hand near Walter's elbow without actually touching him. Walter straightened up slowly, testing the back. "Fine, it just does that sometimes. Sit down for a minute. I've got 7 more boxes." "You've got 0 more boxes," Caleb said. "Sit down." Walter sat on the open tailgate, and Caleb loaded the rest. It took him nearly 20 minutes because the boxes were awkward, and the truck bed was already half full, and Caleb rearranged everything so the weight sat over the axle instead of hanging off the back. He wedged the light items into the gaps so nothing would shift on the highway. He did not rush it, and he did not talk while he did it. Walter watched him work with the particular attention of a man who had spent 4 decades hiring people. When it was done, Caleb closed the tailgate and tested the latch twice. Walter reached for his wallet. "Let me give you something." "No." "Son, you just gave me 20 minutes of your Saturday." "You don't owe me anything," Caleb said. He was already wiping his palms on his pants, already half turned toward his own truck. "Just don't carry heavy stuff like that by yourself next time." It was the plainness of it that caught Walter. There was no performance in it, no waiting. The man had not asked what was in the boxes, or where Walter was headed, or what he did for a living. He had solved the problem, and now he was leaving. And if Walter had driven off without a word, Caleb would not have thought about it again. Walter had spent his whole working life listening to people tell him what they thought he wanted to hear. He knew the sound of it the way a mechanic knows a bad bearing. This was not that. "What's your name?" he asked. "Caleb." "Walter." The old man put out his hand, and Caleb shook it. "You work here?" "Maintenance. North side mostly." "Long day. Compressor on the roof." Caleb glanced at the sky, which had gone the color of a nickel. "You should get on the road before that opens up. Take the interstate, not the canyon. That load's balanced, but it's heavy." Walter looked at the truck, then at the man who had bothered to think about the canyon. Caleb picked up his bag from where he had left it on the asphalt and started for the employee rows. He was 6 steps gone when Walter called after him. "Caleb." He stopped and turned around. "Thank you," Walter said. Caleb raised a hand and kept walking, and in the years afterward, he would come back to that moment more than any other, because it would have cost him nothing to keep going the first time. The black sedan pulled into the lane about 2 minutes later. The woman who got out of it did not belong in that parking lot. She wore a charcoal coat that had been cut for her specifically, and shoes that had never touched a job site, and she came around the front of the car at something close to a run. "Dad," Caleb, unlocking his truck 4 rows over, turned at the sound of it. He looked at the woman, back at the old man in the flannel shirt, standing beside a pickup older than the sedan's warranty, and something did not add up. He shut the door again and walked back because leaving in that exact moment would have been rude. Clare reached her father and stopped short of touching him, scanning his face the way people do when they have been worrying on the drive over. "I called you 4 times. Phone's in the truck. You said you'd be done by 2. Then she registered Caleb standing a few feet away, and her expression changed. It did not become unfriendly. It became careful, which Caleb noticed, because careful is a specific thing, and he had seen it before. Walter gestured between them. "Clare, "This is Caleb. My back went out, and he loaded the whole truck for me. Wouldn't take a dime for it." Caleb nodded at her. "Ma'am." "Claire," she said. Her handshake was brief and firm. "Thank you. He does this. He buys more than he can carry, and then he acts surprised." "I've been carrying my own weight since before you were born," Walter said. "That's exactly the problem." Caleb shifted the bag on his shoulder. "You're in good hands. Take it easy on the back." He went back to his truck without waiting for an answer. Later in the car, Claire watched her father in the passenger seat, with his hand pressed flat against his lumbar spine. "You didn't tell him who you are," she said. "He didn't ask." "That's not an answer." Walter looked out the windshield at the emptying lot. "He picked up that box before he knew anything about me. There's not a man in my own boardroom I could say that about." The call came 9 days later. Walter had gotten the number from the property management office, which had given it to him. Without hesitation, once he explained, he wanted to thank one of their maintenance staff. Caleb answered on the 4th ring, and when he heard the voice, he could not immediately place it. "It's Walter, from the parking lot at Fairmount." "Oh, hey, how's the back?" "Better than it deserves to be. I'd like you to come out to the house for dinner." Caleb, standing in the doorway of a mechanical room with a flashlight in one hand, actually laughed. "That's not necessary." "I didn't say it was necessary." "It was 20 minutes, Walter." "Saturday," Walter said. 6 o'clock. "I appreciate it. I really do. But you don't owe me a dinner for helping you load a truck, and if I show up, then it turns into you paying me back, and then the whole thing was a trade. I'd rather it not be a trade." There was a silence on the line long enough that Caleb thought the call had dropped. "All right," Walter said finally. "Then let me put it differently. I'm not asking you to dinner because I owe you. I'm asking because I'm 67 years old, and I have a lot of acquaintances, and almost no friends, and I'd like to sit across a table from somebody who isn't after anything. If that's not worth your Saturday, I'll leave you alone, and no hard feelings." Caleb switched off the flashlight and stood in the dark for a moment. 6 o'clock, he said. Claire found out about it 2 days before, and she did not take it well. She had driven out to the house on Thursday evening with a folder of quarterly projections. She wanted her father's read-on, and he had mentioned it the way a man mentions the weather, somewhere between the salad and the second glass of wine. "You invited him here," she said. "I did." "Dad, you met him for 20 minutes in a parking lot." "That's right." Claire set down her fork. "Do you understand how this works now? Somebody helps you with a box. 2 weeks later, they're at your table. A month after that, they're asking whether you might know anybody hiring, and it's never a favor. It's always a coincidence, and by the time you see it, you're already 6 months in, and you feel like a monster for saying no. You think he ran a background check on me between the hardware store and the tailgate. I think he saw the car I drove up in," Claire said. "I think he saw my coat. I think he was smart enough to do the math and patient enough not to say anything. And now here we are." Walter took a long look at his daughter. "That's a hell of a thing to build out of nothing." "It's not nothing. It's experience." She pushed the folder aside. "You remember Dennis. You liked Dennis." That landed, and they both let it sit there. "He turned down the money," Walter said quietly. "Before he saw you, before he saw the car. He turned it down and told me not to carry heavy things by myself, and then he walked away. You weren't there for that part." "No," Claire said. "I wasn't." The house stood on a ridge 40 minutes west of the city, and Caleb almost missed the turn because there was no gate and no sign. Just a gravel drive going up through the pines and a dented steel mailbox at the bottom of it, with one word stenciled on the side in white paint. Bennett. He read it, thought nothing much of it, and drove up. The drive went on for close to a mile. The house itself was not what he expected, and it took him a while to work out why. It was a single story. Cedar and stone. Maybe 2,200 square feet. The kind of place a successful contractor might build for his retirement. Nothing about the structure said money. The land did. Caleb stood by his truck for a moment before he went in and looked out at what surrounded it. There was no neighboring roof in any direction. The ridge fell away to the east into open meadow, and to the west it ran up into national forest, and the fence line, when he traced it, disappeared over a rise more than half a mile out. He did not know what an acre cost in that part of the state, but he knew it was not nothing, and he knew nobody bought this much of it by accident. He also knew it was none of his business. Walter cooked badly, and with great confidence, and they ate elk steak that was slightly overdone, and potatoes that were exactly right. Claire arrived 20 minutes late and spent the first hour of the evening waiting. She was waiting for a very specific thing. She had seen it happen enough times that she could have written down the sequence in advance. The man arrives, sees the property, does the arithmetic. There is a moment usually in the first 90 minutes when his posture changes. He starts asking questions that are shaped like interest, but are actually inventory. What did you do before you retired? Is this all your land? Do you still consult? And then at some point entirely by chance, he mentions the thing he happens to be looking for. It did not come. Caleb asked about the elk because he had never cooked one. He asked how Walter had gotten the flue on the wood stove to draw properly, because the one in his rental smoked no matter what he did, and the two of them spent 11 minutes on it. He told a story about a tenant on the north side who had flushed a paint roller down a commercial toilet. He asked Claire what she did, and when she said strategy for a manufacturing firm, he said that sounded complicated, in a way that was clearly the end of his curiosity rather than the beginning of it. And he turned back to Walter to argue about whether a diesel engine was worth the maintenance. He did not ask what the company was called. Around 10 o'clock, he stood up, thanked Walter for the food, said the potatoes were better than the steak, and left. He did not ask for a number. He did not suggest doing it again. Claire stood at the window and watched the taillights of the old truck go down the gravel drive. "Well," her father said behind her, "he's polite. He's more than polite, and you know it." "One dinner doesn't mean anything, Dad." Walter carried the plates to the sink and ran the water. He had watched the two of them across the table for 4 hours, and he had seen something neither of them had noticed yet, which was that Claire had spent the entire evening watching a man who was not watching her back, and that this had bothered her considerably more than being watched ever had. "You're right," he said. "One dinner doesn't mean anything." He was already thinking about the second one. The second dinner happened 3 weeks later, and it did not look like a dinner. Walter called on a Tuesday to say the water heater in the cabin had quit, and he did not trust the man in town who claimed he could fix it, and would Caleb take a look if Walter paid him for his time. Caleb drove out on Saturday, refused the money again, replaced a failed thermocouple in 40 minutes, and found Claire sitting on the cabin porch with a laptop and a look that said she had been told about none of this in advance. After that, they came steadily. The truck needed a brake line. There was a fence post rotting out on the east side of the ridge. Walter wanted a second opinion on a used generator, and there was no particular reason Claire had to be there except that she always was. She figured out what her father was doing by the 4th time, and she confronted him about it in the driveway with the engine of her car still running. "You're matchmaking," Claire said. "It's embarrassing, for both of us. I'm asking a man I like for help with things I can't do anymore. You could hire any of this out, and you know it." Walter leaned on the fender. "So could you, but you keep showing up." She had no answer for that, and it irritated her the entire drive back to the city. What irritated her more over the following weeks was a thing she could not stop noticing. Caleb had never once asked her what she earned. He had not asked what her title meant, or how many people reported to her, or what the company was worth. He had not asked whether the ridge was all Walter's land, though he had clearly seen the fence line. In 4 months, he had asked her exactly one question about her career, and it had been whether she liked it. And when she said that, some days she did, he had nodded and let it go. He also did not try to impress her. That was the part she kept circling back to. Every man she had met since her late 20s had arrived with a version of himself already polished for presentation, and she had learned to listen for the small inflations, the deals that were bigger in the telling than in the ledger. Caleb told her about spending a full shift chasing a leak through a ceiling and finding out it was condensation from a badly wrapped duct. I told it as a story about being wrong for 6 hours. He seemed to find that funnier than she did. The indifference should have insulted her. Instead, she found herself at 41,000 feet on a flight back from a supplier audit in Ohio, thinking about the way he had explained the duct. They became friends over a winter of small repairs. She learned that he read almost nothing, but did the crossword every morning, that he had a temper he kept on a very short leash, and that he had been married once and would not discuss it beyond that single fact. He learned to read her differently than he had at the start. What he had taken for coldness at that first dinner turned out to be a kind of fatigue. He noticed how she scanned a room before entering it. He noticed that when a waiter recognized her name on a credit card, something in her shoulders went flat and stayed flat for the next hour. Somewhere in there, he stopped thinking of her as a wealthy woman being polite to her father's friend and started thinking of her as a person who was tired of wondering whether anyone liked her or liked what came with her. I did not do anything about it. That was deliberate. I told himself it was simple. She ran strategy for a company that made things he had never heard of. She flew to Ohio for a day and came back. She owned a coat that cost more than his transmission. He fixed water heaters. There was no version of that story where it ended well, and he had already been through one ending that had taken him years to walk away from. So he kept a specific and consistent distance, and when her hand brushed his reaching for the same wrench, he moved his hand first. The invitation came in March. Bennett Industrial Group held an annual partner reception at a hotel downtown, and Clare told Caleb about it in the parking lot of a diner, and she made it sound smaller than it was. "It's a work thing," she said. 2 hours, terrible food, good bar. You'd be doing me a favor." Caleb looked at her over the roof of his truck. Months ago, driving past a construction site on Colfax, he had seen the word Bennett stenciled across the boom of a yellow excavator, and the word from the mailbox had come back to him. He had turned it over for about a mile and then dismissed it because the man who owned a company with its name on the side of heavy equipment did not drive a 1998 pickup with a cracked taillight and did not resole his own boots. He had decided it was a common enough last name and let it go. "Will your dad be there? He hates those things," Clare said, which was true and which she believed. Caleb wore the suit he had bought 11 years earlier for a funeral. He knew it was wrong before he reached the doors, because the men going in ahead of him wore suits that moved differently, and there was a valet, and he had parked his own truck 4 blocks away in a garage, because he did not want to hand the keys to anyone. The lobby of the hotel opened into a hall with a ceiling 3 stories high, and on the far wall lit from below and easily 12 feet tall, hung an oil portrait of a man in a dark suit. Caleb stopped in the middle of the floor. The face was leaner than he knew it, the hair darker, but the eyes were exactly the same, and so was the set of the mouth. Beneath the frame, on a brass plate, was a name and 2 titles. Walter Bennett, founder and chairman emeritus. He stood there long enough that a server had to walk around him. Everything he had noticed and set aside came back at once and lined itself up. The land, the mile of gravel drive, the daughter in the charcoal coat, 4 months of fence posts and brake lines, and a man in a flannel shirt asking him to check a generator. And the whole time, the flannel shirt had belonged to a billionaire. He had helped him load a truck. He had told him not to carry heavy things by himself. Caleb was still standing in front of the portrait, working out how quickly he could leave, when a hand came down on his shoulder. "There he is," Walter said loud enough for the 50 people nearest them. The old man had come in a suit that fit him, and he looked for the first time since Caleb had known him exactly like the man in the painting. He turned Caleb toward a knot of executives and introduced him with obvious pleasure as his friend. And he said the word friend in a way that made 3 separate people look up. Caleb watched the room change around him. It happened in a matter of seconds, and it was almost silent. Eyes moved to his suit, then to his then back to Walter's hand on his shoulder. And then the calculating began. A woman near the bar said something to the man beside her without moving her lips much. Somebody laughed in a register Caleb recognized from every job site he had ever worked, the specific laugh men use when they have identified an outsider and want each other to know they have identified him. Within 20 minutes, the story was already forming in the room. Nobody said it to his face. He heard a fragment near the coat check on his way past the words, "the parking lot," and "how convenient" in the same sentence, and he understood that whatever was being assembled about him had been assembled quickly and would be difficult to take apart. He found Clare by a window. "You knew," Caleb said. "Knew what?" "Don't." His voice stayed low and even, which was worse than shouting. "The company on that wall is his. You're the vice president of it. You've been in my truck. You sat on my tailgate in October and ate a gas station sandwich and told me about a supplier in Ohio. And you never once said the name of the company you were talking about. That's not an accident. That's a decision you made 40 times. Clare held her ground. "He asked me not to say anything at the beginning. At the beginning. It's March. And after a while it stopped being his decision and started being mine." She met his eyes. "I wanted to know if you'd treat me differently once you knew who I was. Everyone does. I've never once gotten to find out what somebody was like before." Caleb was quiet, and when he spoke, the evenness had gone out of his voice. "So this whole time," he said, "I've been a test." She started to answer, and found that the honest answer was yes. He set his glass down on the windowsill and walked out through the lobby, past the portrait, and did not look at it. Grant Holloway had watched the entire reception from a position near the bar, and by the following Monday, he had a name, a job title, and an idea. Holloway had sat on the Bennett Industrial Board for 9 years and had spent the last 2 of them assembling the votes to force a restructuring that would move real control away from the family. He had the numbers on paper. What he did not have was a reason compelling enough to make the undecided directors act, and reasons of that kind are rarely found. They are manufactured. He started with 3 phone calls to people who owed him favors, and the story he told was simple enough to rebut and specific enough to sound researched. A maintenance man at the Fairmount Commons complex had worked out who Walter Bennett was long before that afternoon in September. He had known Walter's routine. He had waited for an opportunity, engineered a moment of helpfulness, refused money in front of a security camera. Because refusing money in front of a camera is worth more than $100, and had spent the following 6 months working his way onto the family's property and toward the founder's only daughter. 2 weeks later, a segment of security footage appeared on a gossip site that covered Denver money. The clip ran 51 seconds. It opened on Caleb standing near the tailgate of Walter's truck, apparently waiting. It cut to Walter struggling with a box. It cut again to Caleb lifting boxes, then to Walter holding out folded bills, then to Caleb's hand pushing them away, then to Claire arriving in the charcoal coat and the black sedan. All of it edited so that the sequence read as a performance staged for an audience that arrived precisely on cue. The order was wrong. That was the whole trick. Every frame in it was real, and the sequence was a lie. The headline called him the ordinary man hunting the Bennett fortune. 2 other outlets picked it up within 4 days. At Fairmount Commons, the shift changed. Nobody accused him of anything, which somehow made it worse. His supervisor called him into the office and said that corporate had asked some questions, and that it was nothing, and then asked him as a formality to stay off the north wing roof for a while. A guy from the landscaping crew he had eaten lunch with for 3 years stopped sitting at his table. Somebody printed the headline and left it on the seat of his truck, face up. Caleb did not care what strangers on the internet believed about him. He had gone through a divorce in a small suburb and had learned what it felt like to be discussed, and he had come out the other side with a callus over that particular nerve. What got through the callus was a question asked in a driveway on a Thursday night. Claire had driven to his rental house. She had been fighting the story for 2 weeks inside the company and had gotten almost nowhere, and she was frightened, in a way she did not have the vocabulary for. And when she stood in front of him, what came out was the one thing she had promised herself she would not say. "Caleb, I have to ask you something." She had her arms crossed against the cold. "You really didn't know who my father was before that day, did you?" He looked at her for a few seconds. That was all it took. The silence was not doubt about the answer. It was the arrival of the understanding that she had needed to ask. "If you still have to ask me that," he said, "then the answer doesn't matter anymore." He went inside and shut the door, and Claire stood in the driveway until the porch light went off. He cut them off cleanly after that, the way he did everything. Walter called 9 times over the next month. Caleb answered twice. The first time, Walter offered to make a statement to put the company's communications department on it, to hire a lawyer for him. The second time, Walter offered him a job at 3 times what the complex paid him in a Division 4 states away, where nobody would know the story. Caleb declined both, and the second one made him angrier than anything in the tabloids had. "You still don't hear it," he told the old man. "Every single thing you've offered me is something you can buy. That's the whole problem, Walter. I picked up a box in a parking lot. I've been paying for it. Ever since." He stopped answerings after that. Grant Holloway moved in the last week of April. I took the coverage to the board and framed it as a governance concern rather than a personal one, which is how these things are always framed. The founder's daughter had allowed a man under active media scrutiny into the family home and, by extension, into proximity with the company. Her judgment was at minimum a question. There was a joint venture with a fabrication group out of Kansas City that she had built over 14 months and was 3 weeks from signing, and Holloway argued that the optics were unacceptable and that continuity required a different lead. The vote went against her by a margin of 1. Claire walked out of that room, having lost the only piece of work she had ever been genuinely proud of, and understanding with total clarity that she had also lost something she could not put in a folder. She had spent 4 years training herself to detect a man who wanted her name. She had gotten so accurate at it that when a man arrived who did not want it, she had run him through the test anyway, and then run him through it again, and then asked him to prove himself one final time in a driveway in the cold. Her father was waiting at the house that night. He had heard about the vote from 3 people before she got there. Walter did not shout. He poured 2 glasses and set one in front of her, and what he said came out quietly, which was how she knew how disappointed he was. "The day my back went out," Walter said. "There were maybe 40 people in that lot. A woman looked right at me and got in her car. A man with a grocery cart slowed down and kept going. I counted them, Claire. I had time. He turned the glass on the table. Caleb stopped. He loaded 8 boxes, and he shifted the weight over the axle so nothing would move on the highway, and he wouldn't take $1, and he was already walking away before you ever pulled into that lane. I did all of it before he knew what the name Bennett was worth. Claire looked at the table. And you asked him to prove it, her father said. She did not defend herself because there was nothing to defend. The fear she had carried had been built to keep out men who wanted something from her, and it had worked exactly once on the only man who never had. The shareholders' meeting was set for the 2nd Thursday in May in the same hotel hall where the portrait hung. Grant Holloway had not filed his restructuring proposal for the sake of the joint venture. Taking Kansas City away from Clare had only been the demonstration. The proposal itself would strip the family's remaining operational authority and hand the strategy function to a committee he had already selected, and he intended to introduce it after establishing on the record and in front of every institutional shareholder in the room that the founder's daughter had exercised catastrophic judgment. Claire understood exactly what was coming, because her father's general counsel had walked her through it 2 days in advance. She also understood the choice it left her. She could distance herself from Caleb. It would take one sentence delivered with regret. A lapse in judgment. A relationship she had ended. The moment concerns were raised, a matter now closed. Half the room would find it distasteful, and all of them would find it sufficient, and Holloway's proposal would lose its only emotional engine. Or she could stand in front of 300 people and defend a maintenance man she had not spoken to in 6 weeks, who had asked her for nothing and had every reason never to speak to her again, and who would not be in the room to hear it. She sat in a parked car outside the hotel for 11 minutes on Thursday morning, and then she went in. Holloway spoke for 19 minutes. He was good at it. Unhurried, more sorrowful than aggressive, which is always more effective. He described a pattern of exposure. He noted the coverage without dignifying it, which allowed him to reference it 4 separate times. He said that no one was accusing anyone of anything, and by the time he sat down, the room had absorbed the accusation completely. Claire took the floor. She did not use the prepared remarks in front of her. 2 weeks ago, I lost a joint venture I spent 14 months building, she said, because of a story about a man named Caleb Foster. I'm going to tell you the parts of that story nobody has told you, and I want to be clear that I'm doing it knowing it will cost me. The room went still in the particular way rooms do when someone stops performing. Caleb Foster has never asked this family for a job. My father offered him one at 3 times his salary, and he turned it down and was insulted that it was offered. My father offered him lawyers and a communications team, and he refused those too. In 8 months, he has not accepted $1, 1 favor, or 1 introduction. Not one. She looked at the seated directors. The man you have been told is hunting our money has spent 8 months turning it down every time it was put in front of him. Holloway rose without hurry and said that sincerity was not evidence and that the board had reviewed footage. He put the 51-second clip on the screens. It played exactly as it had played on the gossip site. Caleb near the tailgate, apparently waiting. Struggling. Caleb lifting. The folded bills. The refusal, and then the black sedan, and the charcoal coat, arriving on cue. Somebody 2 rows back exhaled through his teeth. The sequence was persuasive because every frame in it was true. That is what happened, Holloway said, and I'd welcome an alternative explanation. The doors at the back of the hall opened. Walter Bennett came down the center aisle, in the same suit he had worn to the partner reception, carrying nothing but a small drive in his left hand, and the hall turned to watch him. The way rooms had been turning to watch him for 4 decades. He had spent 9 days getting what he was carrying, and it had very nearly not existed at all. The Fairmount Commons Property Management Company retained security footage for 60 days on a rolling overwrite. September to May was far past that. What had saved it was an unrelated insurance claim from a fender collision in the same quadrant of the lot. That same afternoon, which had caused the property manager to pull and archive the entire day off the North Side recorders and hold it pending litigation. That archive had never been released to anyone. Their counsel had refused 3 separate requests from Bennett Industrial's legal department, while the hold was active and would have refused a 4th. The claim settled on a Monday at the end of April. The hold came off with it. Walter drove out the next morning without a lawyer and sat in the lobby of that office for most of a day. He did not identify himself as the founder of anything. He identified himself as the old man on the recording, which was true, and which gave him standing to ask, and by 4 in the afternoon, he had signed a release and walked out with a copy. He handed the drive to the technician at the side of the stage. "Play all of it," Walter said. "Time code visible." The full recording ran 34 minutes. It opened on Walter alone, working 4 boxes into the truck bed by himself. And then it showed him stop and put a hand flat against his lower back. It showed the 5th box. It showed his knees go and his hand catch the tailgate and the box tip toward his chest. Then it showed the parking lot, a woman in workout clothes. 2 cars down, looking directly at him for a moment before unlocking her sedan, a man with a grocery cart, slowing, stopping for perhaps 2 seconds, and continuing. A couple passing close enough to touch the truck. The time code ran on. Nobody in the hall said anything because the footage did not require commentary. It was simply people crossing a parking lot and one man leaning on a tailgate with a box against his chest and the number in the corner of the screen, climbing at 11 minutes and 40 seconds. A figure entered the frame from the right, walking toward the employee rows with a bag over his shoulder. He got 4 steps past, then his head turned. Then he dropped the bag on the asphalt and ran. The hall watched Caleb Foster take the weight of the box, put it up on the tailgate, and stand there with one hand near an old man's elbow. They watched him load 7 more and rearrange all of them and wedge the small items into the gaps. It took him 19 minutes and 11 seconds of real time, and the technician did not skip a second of it. They watched him close the tailgate and test the latch twice. They watched Walter take out his wallet, and they watched Caleb's hand come up and push it away, and then watched Caleb pick his bag up off the asphalt and walk toward the employee rows. The black sedan entered the frame at the top of the lane 2 minutes after that. The technician froze the image with both time codes on screen the moment Caleb refused the money and the moment Claire's car appeared, and the gap between them sat there in numbers that nobody in the room could argue with. Caleb had helped him refused payment and started to walk away before Clare Bennett existed in that parking lot. The edited clip had reversed the order. That was all it had ever been. Holloway said something about the possibility of multiple archives, and it came out badly, and he sat down. The internal investigation ran 3 weeks. It established that the 51-second clip had been reordered from source material obtained through a former contractor at the property management company, that the payment had been routed through a consulting entity, and that the same entity had made 2 payments to a freelance writer at the outlet that had run the story first. Grant Holloway was suspended from the board pending removal. His restructuring proposal was withdrawn without a vote. Nobody sent Caleb a copy of anything. He found out on a Tuesday from his supervisor, who came out to the north wing roof and stood there awkwardly for a while, before saying that corporate had cleared it all up and he could work anywhere on the property again. It was a woman in the leasing office who told him the rest. 2 days later, because she had watched the shareholder meeting webcast and had recognized his name. She told him what the daughter had said and what it had looked like she was giving up to say it. Caleb thanked her and went back to the condenser he was cleaning and did not talk about it to anyone. Claire came to the Fairmount Commons parking lot on a Saturday in early June at 4 in the afternoon, and she came alone. There was no sedan and no driver. She had taken a rideshare and had it drop her at the entrance, and she wore jeans and a jacket she had owned since before the company had gone international, and she stood in the row where the employees parked 2 spaces down from an old truck she recognized and waited an hour and 10 minutes. He came out at 5:10 with a bag over his shoulder, and he stopped when he saw her. "I'm not here to ask you for anything," Claire said. Caleb set the bag on the asphalt, which was the first thing he had done in that lot. The day everything started, and something in her chest turned over. "My biggest mistake wasn't not telling you who my father was," she said. "That was a mistake, and it was a bad one, but it wasn't the one that matters. The one that matters is that I let being afraid turn into a reason to suspect you. You never gave me a single thing to suspect. Not one. I did it anyway because I'd been doing it for years and I was good at it, and then I did it to your face in your driveway, in the cold." Caleb listened without moving. "I watched 34 minutes of what you did in this lot," she went on. "In a room full of people, and the part I keep coming back to isn't that you helped him, it's that I made you prove you meant it." "I know what you said in that room," Caleb said. That stopped her. Somebody in leasing watched it. She told me. He shifted his weight. "And I want you to understand something before you say anything else, because it isn't gratitude, and it doesn't fix it." He looked past her at the lane where her car had come in that first afternoon. "For 9 months, every time I was around your family, I was being measured. At the dinner, at the cabin, in your driveway. I didn't know it, and that's the part I can't get past, because I was just there, and you were grading it. Love doesn't survive that, Claire. Not if one person is always on trial. It isn't that it hurts, it's that it can't work. There's no version of it that works." "I know." "Then you know why I'm not saying yes to whatever this is." "I'm not asking you to." She kept her hands in her jacket pockets. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking for a chance to build it again from the beginning. From nothing. And if it doesn't get there, it doesn't get there." He thought about it for a while, standing in the row where he had parked for 6 years. "Then it starts at nothing," he said. "And it doesn't start with dinner at his house." Over the months that followed, she did it with actions, instead of promises, which was the only currency he had ever accepted. There were no galas, and no grand gestures. They drank coffee at a place near the complex where the mugs were mismatched. She admitted he had been right about the diesel engine, which cost her something. When Walter's truck finally threw a rod in August. The two of them spent 4 weekends in the old man's garage rebuilding it, and Claire came out of the first weekend with a knuckle split open and did not mention it, and came out of the 4th able to identify of what she was handing him. They walked after work. She told him about the Kansas City venture and what losing it had actually felt like, and about a man named Dennis who had proposed to her at 28 and had spent the 11 months of their engagement quietly negotiating with her father's people about a role. Caleb listened to all of it and did not say that it explained her, though it did. Walter, for his part, finally did the one thing he had never done, which was take responsibility out loud. He told Caleb over a workbench that the concealment had started with him, that he had enjoyed being unknown so much that he had never once considered what it would cost the man he was hiding from, and that Claire had inherited a habit he had taught her. Caleb came to see something in himself as well, and it took him most of that autumn. He had told himself all winter that he kept his distance from Clare out of principle. It had not principle. He had looked at her coat and her car and her title and concluded without ever testing it that the two of them could not belong to each other. And he had made that decision on her behalf and never told her. It was the same arithmetic he had spent his whole life refusing to let other people do. He had simply run it in the other direction. They ended up meeting on the one thing they had both wanted the entire time, which was to be loved as a person and not as a position. The following spring, on a Saturday afternoon, Walter parked the rebuilt pickup at the far end of the Fairmount Commons lot in the employee row and set a single cardboard box down beside the tailgate. Then he stood next to it, with his hands in his pockets, and waited. Caleb came out at the end of his shift, saw the box, saw the old man, and started laughing. "Don't tell me you need help again." Walter looked at the box, then at him. "Last time you helped me load a truck," he said. "This time I just want to know whether you intend to keep taking care of my daughter." Claire, coming around the front of the truck with 2 coffees, heard all of it and turned an impressive shade of red. Caleb looked at her and then back at Walter. "That's not something you have to ask me for anymore," he said. The 3 of them walked out of the parking lot together, out of the place where one act of kindness that had seemed to cost nothing at all had changed every life it touched. The real value of kindness lies in being willing to help someone before you know who they are, and without expecting anything in return. Money can make people cautious, but when fear is allowed to run the decision, we can push away the most sincere people who ever walk into our lives. Do not judge anyone by their clothes, their what they own. Watch how they treat other people when there is no reward waiting.